A chill wind swept through the crumbling castle, carrying with it the faint whisper of a name that had been erased from Lyra Blackwood's existence, Lyra Blackwood, the rightful queen of Aetheria. In the grand halls of Iron Mark Pact territory, Lyra moved unseen, her low-ranking status allowing her to blend into the shadows. As an unbound Omega, she toiled in obscurity, her exceptional healing skills going unnoticed by the Pact's hierarchy. Her one weakness lay in her inability to control her emotions, a flaw that had once led to a fateful mistake during a mission gone wrong. Lyra's days blended together in a haze of duty and duty alone, until the day she stumbled upon an ancient tome hidden within the castle's depths. The leather-bound book radiated an otherworldly power, its pages whispering secrets of her long-lost heritage as the rightful queen of Aetheria. Her heart swelled with determination. Lyra knew that her destiny awaited. As she delved deeper into the mysteries of her past, whispers began to circulate among the Pact's upper echelons. Lyra was being watched by Kael, Iron Mark's enigmatic alpha. Their paths crossed frequently, and though their interactions were brief, the air seemed to vibrate with tension. Kael's piercing gaze lingered on Lyra, as if sensing a truth that lay just beyond her grasp. During one fateful night, while investigating strange occurrences within the Pact's borders, Lyra was ambushed by a group of rogue wolves led by Victor, Iron Mark's jealous second-in-command. The ensuing battle left Lyra battered and bruised, her Omega senses reeling from the vicious attack. As she stumbled through the forest, Kael appeared out of nowhere, his strength and speed proving an unexpected aid. Together, they fought off their pursuers, their movements fluid and synchronized as if born of long practice. During a momentary lull in combat, Lyra caught Kael's eye, her gaze locking onto his like a key fitting into a well-worn lock. Though the connection was fleeting, its impact lingered. As the night wore on, Lyra discovered that she had inadvertently uncovered an ancient hidden path deep within the forest, one rumored to lead to the location of Aethoria'S most treasured relic, the Starheart Crystal. With Kael by her side, they pressed onward, their determination and trust growing with each passing moment. Their footsteps echoed through the darkness as they finally reached the crystal's resting place. Lyra reached out a trembling hand, feeling an energy that threatened to consume her, only for Victor's treacherous blade to shatter the tranquility. In that instant, a searing sound pierced the air. Lyra Blackwood, spoken aloud in a voice both familiar and foreign. Lyra's gaze darted away from Victor's blade, her eyes focusing on the crystal at her feet. The sudden sound of her name echoed through the darkness, and her heart skipped a beat as her skin prickled with unease. "What does it mean?" Lyra asked, her voice laced with a hint of wariness, as she tried to maintain a sense of control. Victor's eyes locked onto hers, his expression unyielding. "You know exactly what it means," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "The Pact knows you're not who they think you are." Lyra's heart quickened, and she felt a faint tremble in her fingers as she raised them to her lips. She'd learned to mask her emotions well over the years, even from those closest to her. Vesper Blackwood, her mother and the ruthless leader of their pack, had always been a master at manipulating emotions. As Victor turned to leave, Lyra caught a glimpse of Kael standing in the shadows, his eyes fixed intently on her. For an instant, his gaze seemed to hold a flicker of intensity, but it was quickly replaced by a neutral mask. Lyra's mind whirled with questions, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. She needed to understand what Victor was insinuating and why. She followed him, her footsteps echoing through the darkness as they made their way deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, the trees seeming to close in around them like skeletal fingers. As they walked, Lyra's thoughts turned to her childhood home, a small cottage on the outskirts of Iron Mark territory. It was there she'd stumbled upon an old photograph, hidden away in a dusty trunk. A woman with an uncanny resemblance to herself gazed back at her, her eyes seeming to hold secrets and stories untold. Lyra's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where she kept the worn photograph as a keepsake. Her fingers brushed against something else, a folded piece of paper, tucked away for safekeeping. The paper slipped from her fingers, its edges fluttering to the ground as Lyra's gaze snapped back to Victor, her eyes blazing with a mix of fear and defiance. For a moment, their gazes locked, the air thick with tension, as the forest seemed to hold its breath. "You're not who you say you are, Lyra Blackwood," Victor whispered, his voice low and deadly, leaving Lyra's heart frozen in a desperate silence. Victor's eyes locked onto Lyra's, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that sent shivers down her spine. You're not who you say you are. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as Lyra's gaze faltered, her mind scrambling for a response. Pride and wariness wrestled within her, each trying to claim dominance over the other like rival pack members vying for control of the hierarchy's highest seat. Her voice was clipped, guarded, the words tumbling out in a staccato rhythm that betrayed a hint of uncertainty beneath the surface. I don't know what you're insinuating. Victor took a step closer, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Lyra's skin prickle. His words dripped with venom, each syllable aimed at exploiting her deepest insecurities. You're not just any Omega, Lyra Blackwood. You're something more. The room seemed to spin around her as if Victor's accusations had unleashed a maelstrom within the very fabric of their reality. Lyra's breath caught in her throat, and for an instant, she was back to that childhood photograph, the one where her mother smiled with a familiarity that made her blood run cold. Vesper Blackwood, the pack leader, had always been the epitome of strength and power, but at what cost? The revelation sent a shiver coursing down Lyra's spine as she forced herself to focus on Victor's words. What is it? Her voice was barely above a whisper now, the sound carrying away into the darkness like a lost bird's cry. Victor's eyes narrowed. You have something that belongs to your family, and I aim to find it. The threat hung in the air, an unspoken promise of destruction if Lyra didn't cooperate. Lyra felt her mind racing with questions, but she hesitated, unsure which path to take. For a moment, she wavered like a lost traveler facing an uncertain road ahead, weighing the value of honesty against the weight of her mother's disapproval. A faint whisper drifted on the wind, Lyra caught it, and for that fleeting instant, she heard the soft whisper of her own name, carried by an ancient tome hidden in the pack's library. The whisper seemed to caress her ear, its gentle warmth spreading through her veins like a slow-moving flame. Mother? Lyra whispered back, her voice barely audible, as she felt the world around her begin to tip on its axis. Is that you? Lyra Blackwood's gaze locked onto Vesper's face, her eyes narrowing as she searched for any sign of deceit. The whispered conversation still lingered in her mind, its words like a poison spreading through her veins. Mother? Lyra repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Vesper's expression remained unchanged, but her voice took on a subtle edge. Lyra, focus on your work. We have a meeting with the Iron Mark Pack soon, and I need you to attend. It's for your own good, after all. Lyra's shoulders tensed as she looked around the library, her eyes landing on a book with the Blackwood family crest emblazoned on its cover. The symbol was subtly different from the one on her own badge, and Lyra's heart quickened with a mixture of fear and excitement. Her gaze snapped back to Vesper, but her mother's face remained impassive. I'll make sure it's done, Lyra said, her voice tight with restraint. As she turned to leave, Lyra caught sight of Kael standing by the door, his eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. She felt a shiver run down her spine as he mouthed a single word, trust. Lyra's mind was racing with questions and doubts. Who was Kael really working for? And what did he want from her? But before she could ask him, Vesper spoke up, her voice dripping with venom. Remember, Lyra, you're an Omega. You have your place in the pack. Don't forget it. You'd do well to keep your station, Lyra. It's safer that way. The words hit Lyra like a blow, sending a flush of anger rising to her cheeks. She felt a familiar spark of defiance ignite within her, but it was quickly extinguished by her habit of obedience. As she turned away from her mother's glare, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. In her mind's eye, Lyra saw an image of a woman with piercing green eyes, standing in front of a roaring fire. The woman's features were eerily familiar, and for a moment, Lyra felt like she was staring at herself from another lifetime. The realization sent a jolt through Lyra's body, but before she could process it further, Vesper spoke up again, her voice cold as ice. We need to discuss the upcoming meeting with Iron Mark. Meet me in my chambers, and don't be late, Lyra. As Lyra followed her mother out of the library, she felt the air grow thick with tension. Something was off, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. As Vesper's voice rose as they ascended to their quarters, Lyra's eyes locked onto the iron door mechanism, her mind racing with the realization that the Iron Mark Pax emblem, etched into the metal, was eerily similar to the one on her own badge, sparking a shattering truth: she was not an Omega, but a Blackwood, and her true heritage was about to set her world and pack ablaze. Lyra's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm against the metal railing as she waited for Vesper to return from their meeting with the Pack Elder. The soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses from the common room created a sense of normalcy, but Lyra's mind was elsewhere. Her gaze drifted to the small, intricately carved wooden box on her lap, its lid open to reveal a few well-worn letters tied with a faded ribbon. She picked up one of the letters, running her thumb over the creased surface as she read the familiar words. "My dearest Lyra, I am proud of you more than I can say. Your dedication and work ethic are an inspiration to us all. You may not be in the same pack as me, but know that your presence here has made a difference. With love, Aunt Sophia." Lyra's eyes widened as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, the familiar scent of her aunt's perfume lingering on the edge of the box. It was moments like these that Lyra felt a deep sense of longing, a connection to the life she had left behind in Aethoria. Just then, Vesper emerged from their meeting, a hint of annoyance etched on her face. "Lyra, we need to discuss your duties," she said, her voice dripping with expectation. "The pack's resources are stretched thin. I require you to take on more responsibility." Lyra's instincts prickled as she nodded, her tone clipped and guarded. She folded her arms across her chest, a faint tension in her shoulders. Vesper's smile was cold, calculated. "I've spoken with Kael, our Alpha's trusted advisor. He agrees that you're more than capable of handling the additional workload." Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she heard Kael's name, her chest rising and falling with a sudden, shallow breath. She suppressed the flutter in her chest, her expression unchanged. Vesper's eyes narrowed. "You'd do well to remember that, Lyra." Vesper's eyes seemed to bore into Lyra's very soul as she finished speaking, her voice dripping with a calculated menace that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. Vesper's eyes seemed to bore into Lyra's very soul as she finished speaking, her voice dripping with a calculated menace that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. Lyra's gaze flickered to the small, intricately carved wooden box on her lap, its lid open to reveal a few well-worn letters tied with a faded ribbon, now seeming eerily out of place in the midst of Vesper's intimidating warning. "And what would happen if I refused?" Lyra's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes locking with Vesper's in a silent challenge. Lyra Blackwood's fingers trembled as she adjusted the wooden box on her lap, the soft scratch of leather against metal echoing through the stillness. Vesper's warning had left a bitter taste in her mouth, one that was slowly being replaced by a burning curiosity. The worn letters tied with a faded ribbon seemed out of place among the pack's stern attire, but Lyra couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to it. Her gaze drifted back to Vesper, who stood resolute, her eyes flashing with a calculated intensity that made Lyra's skin prickle. Vesper's jaw clenched, her lips compressing into a thin line. Lyra searched for any sign of Vesper's emotions, but her face remained a mask. "And what would happen if I refused?" Lyra had asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. She knew she shouldn't have spoken out, but something about Vesper's words had awakened a spark within her. Vesper's expression didn't change, but a hint of amusement danced in the depths of her eyes. She took a step closer, her presence suffocating. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine as Vesper's hand extended, her fingers brushing against Lyra's wrist like ice. Lyra's heart quickened, pounding in her chest like a drum. Just as Vesper reached out to take the box from Lyra's hands, Sable burst into the room, her boots clomping on the stone floor. She skidded to a stop, her eyes fixed on the box with a mix of shock and horror. Her hand instinctively went to the dagger at her belt, but instead of drawing it, she took a step back, her eyes darting to Vesper. Vesper's gaze snapped to Sable, a flicker of anger dancing in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low and even. But before Sable could respond, she spoke up, her voice laced with panic. "Vesper, I had to tell you." Vesper cut her off, her voice dripping with venom. "What have you done?" she spat, her eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. The air around her seemed to darken, as if the shadows themselves were coalescing into a living, breathing thing. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she watched Vesper's face twist into a snarl, her lips curling back from her teeth. Sable took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold, her mind racing with questions. As Sable's words hung in the air, Vesper's expression shifted from fury to shock, her eyes widening as she stumbled backward, the box slipping from Lyra's grasp. The leather strap broke free, the ribbon unraveling like a snake, and Lyra's eyes locked onto the wooden box, now spinning out of control, the letters fluttering like wings, as the room plunged into darkness. Sable's words still lingered in the air as Vesper stumbled backward, her eyes widening in shock. The leather strap broke free from Lyra's grasp, the ribbon unraveling like a snake as the wooden box spun out of control. The letters fluttered like wings, and the room plunged into darkness. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, her breathing quickening as she watched Vesper with a steady gaze, her eyes locked onto the Omega badge pinned to Vesper's vest. A subtle variation on their family crest adorned Lyra's badge, one that seemed out of place among the pack's other symbols. As the darkness receded, Lyra spotted Kael standing in the doorway, his expression a mask of concern. "What happened?" he asked, striding toward her with an air of authority. Vesper's voice was shrill as she wove past Sable and Davin, who stood frozen on either side of their leader. "You're a threat to our pack, Lyra Blackwood," Vesper spat, her eyes flashing with anger. She bared her teeth, and Vesper took a step back, her hands raised in defense. Lyra's lips curled into a bitter smile, and Kael's grip on her arm tightened as he pulled her toward him. "Let's get out of here," he whispered urgently, his words laced with concern. But Lyra hesitated, her gaze lingering on Vesper's face. Something in those eyes, a flicker of fear or guilt, made her pause, her brow furrowing in confusion. In the chaos that followed, Lyra spotted Victor slipping away unnoticed, his footsteps silent as he vanished into the shadows. His parting words echoed in her mind, "Look to your family crest for answers." The wooden box now lay abandoned on the floor, its contents scattered about like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Lyra's fingers closed around the edge of the box, feeling an inexplicable pull toward it. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined the surface, her eyes searching for the hidden message. As Lyra's fingers closed around the edge of the box, a cold realization dawned on her, her family crest, the subtle variation on the pack symbols, was not just a family heirloom, but a key to unlocking her true identity, and the throne of Aethoria. Lyra's fingers closed around the edge of the box, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she examined the surface, her eyes scanning the intricate patterns for a hidden message. As she turned the box over in her hands, a cold realization dawned on her, her family crest, the subtle variation on the pack's symbols, seemed to be staring back at her. As she stared at it in the dim light of the library, Lyra's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with possibilities. She had always been taught that her family crest was nothing more than a trivial detail, a nod to their pack's history. But now, as she pored over her small, worn copy of the pack's laws, Lyra's eyes scanned the pages with a growing sense of urgency, her fingers tracing the yellowed edges of the pages. As she flipped through the book, Lyra stumbled upon an entry that made her heart skip a beat. It was a passage about the Blackwood family crest, one that mentioned a long-lost heir. The words danced on the page before her, the ink seeming to shimmer in the dim light. She read them aloud, her voice low and measured. "When the Blackwood line is forgotten, their mark remains, a reminder of power yet to be claimed." The words hung in the air, leaving Lyra feeling unsettled. Could it be? Was she really the long-lost heir? Lyra's mind reeled with questions and doubts. What did this mean for her claim to the throne of Aethoria? And what would happen if she revealed her true identity to Vesper Blackwood, the ruthless and cunning pack leader who had always assumed control of their pack? A figure emerged from the shadows, its presence marked by the soft creak of leather. "We have 10 minutes, the figure said, its voice low and even. "You still want to do this?" Lyra's gaze darted toward the figure, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. "What's at stake?" she asked, her voice clipped and guarded. The figure paused, its presence seeming to fill the room. "The balance of power within the pack. Your decision will have far-reaching consequences." Lyra's grip on the box tightened. "What truth?" she demanded, her voice low and even. The figure's expression remained inscrutable, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. As Lyra's eyes locked onto Vesper's, the air seemed to vibrate with tension, the soft creak of leather now a mocking echo of the silence that followed. The figure's gaze never wavered, its eyes burning with an unspoken intensity that made Lyra's skin prickle with unease. And then, in a voice that was almost a whisper, Vesper Blackwood spoke a single, shattering word: run. Lyra's boots crunched through the dry underbrush, her senses on high alert as she navigated the treacherous terrain. The sun had long since set, casting a dark shadow over the landscape that made every step feel like a gamble. She'd been tracking Vesper for hours, but the pack leader's trail was constantly evading her. As Lyra rounded a boulder, the moon broke through the canopy above, illuminating Vesper standing atop a rocky outcropping. Her mother's figure seemed to be carved from the shadows themselves, radiating an aura of quiet menace. The air around them vibrated with tension, Lyra's heart quickening in response. Vesper spoke in a low, measured tone, her words dripping with a calculated menace that made Lyra's skin prickle. "You've been asking too many questions, Lyra. It's time to leave." Lyra's heart quickened at the warning, but she didn't falter. She'd come this far, she couldn't turn back now. Her footfall slowed, her weight settling onto each step as if anchoring herself to the earth. But as she took a step forward, Vesper raised a hand, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. "I mean it, Lyra," Vesper said, her voice firm but devoid of warmth. "You don't want to cross me." Lyra hesitated for an instant, her gut instinct screaming at her to retreat. Pride and curiosity wrestled with fear as she took another step closer, her hand reaching out to grasp a nearby rock for support. "You're wrong, Mother," Lyra said, trying to keep her voice steady, though a hint of defiance crept into her tone. She stood a little taller, her shoulders squaring in a subtle show of defiance. Vesper's gaze narrowed, her expression unreadable. "I'm telling you, Lyra, run. Now." The warning was clear, its weight pressing down on Lyra's shoulders. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine as she knew what Vesper would do if she refused. The pack's punishment for disobedience was brutal and unforgiving. But as Lyra looked at her mother, she saw something that made her question everything. A fleeting glimmer of fear in those icy eyes, a spark of recognition that Lyra couldn't quite grasp. Lyra's mind reeled as she realized that everything she thought she knew about her past might be wrong. The family crest on her Omega badge seemed different. And what was with the strange symbol on the old scroll in the pack archives? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Lyra knew it wouldn't change a thing. Vesper would still expect obedience, the pack's rules still applied. Yet as she turned to leave, Lyra caught sight of something that made her breath catch in her throat, a name on Vesper's palm, written in ink so fine it seemed to dance across the skin. "Victor," it said. Lyra's eyes widened in shock, her gaze burning with a newfound determination. She vanished into the darkness, her footsteps light and swift as she disappeared into the night, driven by a hunger for answers. Lyra's footsteps echoed through the deserted alleyway, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of Victor or his pack. The lawyer's words still lingered in her mind, 10 minutes, and she would be dragged before the council to face Vesper's accusations. As she navigated the winding alleys, Lyra's thoughts turned to the Blackwood family crest, subtly different from their own symbol, which adorned her Omega badge. She recalled the faded photograph of a woman with an uncanny resemblance to herself, yet Vesper Blackwood was the pack's leader at the time. The memory sent a shiver coursing through her veins. Lyra's hand instinctively went to the pouch containing the mysterious scroll she'd found in the pack archives. The arcane symbol etched onto its surface seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, fueling her determination to uncover the truth about her past. Her gaze darted toward the alleyway's end, where a faint light flickered from a nearby tavern. Lyra knew Victor often frequented such establishments, and perhaps he might have some information about her true identity. With a deep breath, she quickened her pace, her footsteps growing more deliberate as she approached the tavern. As she pushed open the door, the warm glow of lanterns enveloped her, and Lyra's eyes scanned the room for Victor or his pack. But instead, they locked onto Kael, sitting alone at the bar, his eyes fixed on a small, leather-bound book in front of him. His gaze met hers, and for an instant, a flicker of tension crackled between them. "What's your interest in the Blackwood family, Lyra?" Kael's voice was low, measured as he set aside the book, revealing a hint of caution beneath his calm demeanor. Lyra's pride flared, her jaw tightening in response. She bit back her response. She needed to tread carefully, one misstep could lead to her discovery being exposed. "Just gathering information," she replied, her tone clipped, as she took a seat next to Kael at the bar. Their conversation was stilted, with Kael's eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Lyra sensed his unease, but refused to probe further. Instead, she focused on the whispered conversations around them, filtering out the pack members' banter and focusing on the rumors circulating about a long-lost heir. As the minutes ticked by, Lyra's anxiety grew, her heart pounding in her chest. She mentally prepared herself for the confrontation with Vesper and the council, while Kael watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Suddenly, he leaned in, his voice barely audible over the din of conversation. The air was electric with tension as Kael's words hung in the air, his eyes locked on Lyra's, and she felt the weight of his warning settle heavy on her shoulders. Suddenly, the tavern's door swung open, and Victor strode in, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Lyra, his expression a cold, calculated mask. Sable leaned against the bar, a foamy mug cradled in her hands as she watched Victor stride into the tavern. The air inside seemed to vibrate with tension, and Lyra's neck prickled with unease as she tried to focus on the drink in front of her. Victor made his way through the crowd, his eyes locked onto Lyra as he wove past the patrons. His expression was a cold mask, but Lyra detected a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps curiosity or annoyance? She couldn't quite read him, and that unnerved her more than anything else. As Victor approached, Kael stepped forward, his hand on Lyra's arm in a gesture of warning. The gesture made Lyra's skin prickle with tension, and she felt a surge of anxiety. "I meant what I said, Victor," he growled softly, his voice carrying across the room. "You know how it is when someone doesn't fit." Victor snorted, but the sound didn't quite match the look in his eyes, more like a hint of calculation, as if weighing Kael's words and Lyra's position within their pack. The weight on her shoulders seemed to shift ever so slightly, making Lyra's heart rate quicken. The tavern's fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the room. A hooded figure sat in the corner, sipping a mug of ale that seemed almost black by comparison. Lyra's gaze lingered on the figure, her mind wondering what secrets they kept hidden behind their mask, and whether they'd ever shed it. She turned her attention back to Victor, who now stood just beyond Kael's outstretched hand. Their eyes met, and for an instant, Lyra saw a glimmer of something akin to recognition. It vanished almost as quickly, leaving her wondering if she'd imagined it at all. "I'll be speaking with Sable," Victor said finally, his voice firm but controlled. "She has information about things I need to discuss." Lyra's instincts screamed warning, but she didn't know what they were trying to tell her, yet. With a flick of her wrist, Kael released her arm, and Lyra slid onto the stool beside him, her eyes never leaving Victor as he disappeared into the crowd. "What's the point of getting Sable involved?" Kael asked, his voice laced with skepticism. As Victor turned to leave, Lyra's eyes locked onto the hooded figure in the corner, who suddenly pushed back their hood, revealing a face that was unmistakably her own, the face Lyra had been told didn't exist. Lyra slid onto the stool beside Kael, her eyes never leaving Victor as he disappeared into the crowd. The flicker of amusement on his face was gone, replaced by a look of wary concern that made his eyes narrow. "What's the point of getting Sable involved?" Kael asked, his voice laced with skepticism as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As Victor turned to leave, Lyra's gaze locked onto the hooded figure in the corner, who suddenly pushed back their hood, revealing a face that was unmistakably her own, the face she'd been told didn't exist. Her heart quickened in her chest. Kael followed her stare and leaned in closer, his eyes widening as he took in the stranger's features. "That can't be," he whispered, his voice trembling as he took a step back, his hands fluttering to his elbows. Lyra felt her grip on Kael's arm tighten, a surge of unease washing over her as she watched the woman who'd just been revealed, a woman Lyra had never seen before yet somehow knew all too well. The air seemed to thicken around her, making it hard to breathe. "You don't understand," the stranger said, her eyes flashing with a fierce intensity that made Lyra's skin prickle. "I'm Lyra Blackwood, and I'm your sister." Lyra's mind reeled as she struggled to process this revelation. Her mother, Vesper, would never admit such a thing, and Lyra couldn't reconcile the face before her with the woman who'd spent her entire life denying any connection to the pack. She felt a wave of disorientation wash over her, like she'd been punched in the gut. Kael's grip on her arm relaxed, his hand brushing against hers in a gentle, reassuring touch. "We need to be careful," he whispered, his voice low and urgent, his eyes darting towards the hooded figure as if searching for an escape route. "Then Mother knows more than she's letting on," Lyra finished, her mind racing with implications. She glanced up at the hooded figure, now standing tall, her eyes flashing with a fierce determination that made Lyra's heart sink. "You're not who you say you are," Vesper Blackwood spat from across the room, her voice dripping with venom that made Lyra's skin crawl. Aethoria'S gaze flashed to her mother, and Lyra's eyes widened as Vesper's face twisted into a snarl, the hidden scars on her cheeks and jawbone suddenly visible, revealing a depth of pain and rage that made Lyra's mind reel. "You'll never know the truth," Vesper hissed, her eyes burning with a hatred that seemed to consume her very being, as she took a step closer to Lyra, her hand reaching out to snatch the pendant around Lyra's neck, now visible as Aethoria'S own mark. Vesper Blackwood's eyes blazed with a hatred so intense it seemed to sear the air around her, the flickering candles casting eerie shadows on the walls of the pack-gathering hall. Her gaze locked onto Lyra, and for an instant, Aethori'a thought she saw something there that made her stomach twist, a glimmer of shame, perhaps, or regret. "You're not who you say you are," Vesper spat again, her voice venomous enough to make the gathered pack members shift uncomfortably in their seats. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as Lyra's eyes met her mother's, and for a moment, it was like they were the only two people in the room. Aethoria'S gaze darted away from Vesper, her eyes wandering across the hall until they landed on Kael, who sat serenely at the pack leader's table. What did he want with Lyra? Why had his expression turned cold and guarded, as if he was hiding something? Lyra's own mind reeled as she processed what Vesper had said. She knew her mother wouldn't lie to her, not like this. There had to be some truth behind the words. The elder pack member, Sable Nightshade, stood up from her seat, his eyes meeting Lyra's with a flicker of concern. "Lyra, perhaps we should discuss." "No," Vesper cut in, her voice dripping with malice. "She doesn't deserve to know the truth." Sable hesitated before sitting back down, his gaze dropping away from Lyra. As the pack discussion began, Lyra's mind whirled with questions and doubts. What did she mean by "you're not who you say you are"? Did it have something to do with her family crest? And why did Vesper seem so convinced that she was lying? The sound of rustling pages came from behind Aethori'a, followed by the soft clearing of throat. "Excuse me," a voice said, and Lyra turned to see Victor, their pack's historian, holding up an ancient tome. "I believe this might be relevant," he said, his eyes locked onto Vesper. The elder's gaze narrowed, her expression twisting into a snarl as if she'd rather kill the book than look at it. Victor opened the cover, revealing yellowed pages adorned with the Blackwood family crest. Aethori'a felt a shiver run down her spine as Lyra reached out a trembling hand to touch the page, her fingers brushing against Victor's. "Lyra, no," Vesper hissed, stepping forward as if she'd caught Lyra by the wrist. The sound of rustling pages was followed by a faint whisper, carried on the wind, "Proserpina." Why had that name been whispered in such hushed tones? Victor's hand slid off Lyra's arm, and he stepped back, his eyes locked on Vesper with a mixture of concern etched on his face. "What's going on here?" Aethori'a, who had been watching from across the room, took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. The words Proserpina hung in the air like a challenge, a name that was whispered in hushed tones by those who knew it was forbidden. Lyra's gaze darted between Victor and Aethori'a, her heart racing with a sudden jolt of excitement. She had heard whispers about Proserpina before, ancient stories of a bloodline thought to be extinct, of a prophecy tied to the Blackwood family crest. But she had never imagined that it was connected to her own past. Vesper's eyes narrowed, her grip on Lyra's arm tightening as her knuckles whitened. "You're not going to indulge in this fantasy, Lyra," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "There's nothing here for you, nothing worth fighting for. It's a myth, a legend, I think it's more than that," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm, but a thread of uncertainty creeping into her tone. Vesper's gaze snapped back to Lyra, her eyes flashing with warning as her pupils constricted. "I think you're reading too much into this, Lyra. You don't know what you're talking about." Lyra's skin prickled with unease as she glanced at Victor, who seemed frozen in place, his eyes locked on Vesper as if waiting for an explanation. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and a fine sweat broke out on Lyra's forehead. Suddenly, a faint rustling sound came from behind them, followed by the soft whisper of pages turning. It was like the wind had changed direction, carrying a message that only a few could hear. Arya took another step forward, her voice low and urgent. "We need to get out of here, now. This feels like a trap." "Agreed," Vesper said, her voice cool and detached, her jaw clenched in a thin line. "Let's just leave while we still can." Lyra's heart skipped a beat as Vesper's grip on her arm tightened. She knew what Arya was saying, they were being led into a trap, one that would leave them vulnerable to the pack's wrath. But Lyra didn't care about the danger. The pages turned with a sudden, sinister finality, and Lyra's eyes met Vesper's, a flicker of defiance sparking in their depths before Vesper's expression turned cold, her grip on Lyra's arm tightening to the breaking point. As Lyra's heart sank, Vesper's eyes seemed to bore into her very soul, and Lyra knew in that instant that she would do anything to protect the name that had just been whispered. "You're mine, Lyra," Vesper hissed, her voice low and deadly. Lyra Blackwood's fingers dug into the pack leader's pale skin, her grip tightening as she tried to pull away from Vesper's crushing weight. The air was heavy with tension, the only sound the quiet hum of the pack members gathered around them, their eyes watching Lyra like hungry animals. Vesper's gaze was a vice, squeezing the life from Lyra's chest. She tried to shake off the feeling of suffocation, but it was no use. Her skin crawled with unease, her breath catching in her throat as she struggled against Vesper's grip. The pack's dark energy pulsed around them, like a living thing that hungered for Lyra's submission. She felt it in every fiber of her being, a constant reminder that she was nothing more than a pawn in Vesper's game. The ancient ritual, hidden away in the depths of her mind, whispered warnings of the danger that lurked within Vesper's eyes. Lyra's mind flashed back to the ritual, its cryptic message echoing through her thoughts like a warning. She had been searching for answers for so long, and now it seemed that she finally had a clue. But at what cost? Vesper's voice was a low, deadly thrum, sending shivers down Lyra's spine as she pulled her closer. "You're mine," she repeated, her words dripping with malice. Lyra's fingers trembled as Vesper's breath danced across her skin, leaving a trail of gooseflesh in its wake. Lyra's lips moved silently, her words unspoken. She tried to speak, but her voice was caught in her throat like a rock. Instead, she let her body speak for her, her shoulders stiffening in defiance as she struggled against Vesper's grip. The pack leader's grip on Lyra's arm tightened, her fingers digging into Lyra's skin like talons. But Vesper's expression faltered, her eyes flashing with anger before snapping back into place. For a moment, Lyra thought she saw something else there, something like a glimmer of madness. "I'll show you what it means to be mine," Vesper spat, her voice laced with venom. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as Vesper's eyes burned with an inner fire, a flame that seemed to grow brighter with every passing moment. As Lyra struggled against the pack leader's grasp, she knew that she was in grave danger. She was trapped, with no escape from Vesper's clutches. But in that moment, Lyra found a spark of determination within herself, a flame that burned bright and hot, refusing to be extinguished.